The Galactic Council had seen many species rise and fall across the stars. They had witnessed civilizations that could bend reality with their minds, races that lived for thousands of years, and beings that could traverse dimensions at will. But nothing had prepared them for humanity. When the first human ship arrived at the neutral station of Nexus Prime, the assembled representatives barely gave them a second glance. The vessel was crude by galactic standards, metal welded together with visible seams, primitive fusion drives belching plasma, and communications arrays that looked like they belonged in a museum. The humans themselves appeared equally unremarkable, bipedal, soft-skinned creatures with no natural weapons, no psychic abilities, and lifespans that were laughably short by cosmic standards. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zeridian Empire barely suppressed a snort of disdain as the human delegation walked into the Grand Chamber. Their leader, a middle-aged woman named Sarah Chun, moved with practiced diplomacy, but her companions unsettled him. There was something in their eyes, a coldness that didn't match their polite smiles. "Welcome to the Galactic Council," Kethvar announced, his crystalline form shimmering with condescension. "We understand your species has achieved faster-than-light travel. A remarkable accomplishment for such a young civilization." Sarah Chun stepped forward, her expression calm. "Thank you for this opportunity. Earth seeks peaceful relations with all galactic civilizations." The chamber murmured with polite acknowledgement. The Thraxians clicked their mandibles in what passed for laughter among their kind. The ethereal Vorthak floated silently, their energy forms pulsing with amusement. Even the massive Gorlak delegates, each the size of a small building, seemed to rumble with barely contained mirth. What none of them noticed was how the human delegation's hands never strayed far from concealed weapons, how their eyes constantly cataloged exits and potential threats, or how they unconsciously positioned themselves to cover each other's blind spots. "Of course," Kethvar continued, "there are certain protocols for new species, standards that must be met before full membership can be considered." "We understand," Chen replied. "What would you require?" The Thraxian delegate, General Zak Th, leaned forward on his multiple legs. His species had conquered 17 star systems through sheer military might. Combat effectiveness trials. Every species must prove their worth in battle. It's an ancient tradition, one that separates the civilized from the primitives. Chen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Combat trials? Standardized warfare scenarios," explained Counselor Veltar of the Astery Collective. Her telepathic abilities allowed her to sense the emotional undercurrents in the room, but, strangely, the humans felt muted, controlled. Mock battles to assess military capability. Nothing personal, you understand. Simply a way to determine where your species fits in the galactic hierarchy. The chamber fell silent as Chun conferred quietly with her team. One of them, a lean man with scars on his hands, whispered something that made her nod slowly. "We accept," Chun announced. "When do we begin?" General Zak Th's compound eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction. "Excellent. You'll face the Korthak swarm first. They're manageable opponents for newcomers. Standard rules apply. No weapons of mass destruction, no targeting of civilian populations, conventional warfare only." As the session concluded and delegations began to disperse, Counselor Veltar found herself troubled by something she couldn't quite identify. The humans had agreed too easily, too quickly. Most new species required extensive deliberation before accepting combat trials. But these humans seemed almost eager. She tried once more to probe their emotions telepathically, but encountered the same strange blankness. It wasn't the disciplined mental shielding of trained psychics. It was something else entirely. Something that felt like looking into an abyss that stared back. Later that evening, in the privacy of their assigned quarters, the human delegation shed their diplomatic masks. The scarred man, Colonel Marcus Webb, reviewed tactical data on a holographic display while Sarachin spoke quietly into an encrypted communicator. "The trials are confirmed," she reported. "We're facing the Korthak swarm first, then, likely the Vorthak Legion if we advance." The voice on the other end was gravelly, speaking with a Russian accent thick with authority. "Understood. Are you certain about this approach, Sarah? Once we unleash them, there's no going back." Chen looked at Webb, who was studying footage of Korthak warriors with the intensity of a predator analyzing prey. "The galaxy expects soldiers, General. They're going to get something very different." "Good," the voice replied. "The Reapers are already in transit. They'll arrive in 72 hours. Webb looked up from his display, a thin smile crossing his scarred features. The council has no idea what they've just invited to their little party. Meanwhile, in the Korthak home system, General Vexlar was assembling his forces for what he assumed would be another routine demonstration of superiority. The Korthak were a warrior species, their bodies naturally armored with chitinous plates, their limbs ending in razor-sharp claws. They had never lost a first contact trial. "How many humans are they sending?" asked his aide, a young warrior eager for battle. "Their entire fleet," Vexlar replied, his mandibles clicking with amusement. 12 ships. They claim it represents their full military capability. The aide's excitement dimmed slightly. "Only 12? That seems insufficient." "Indeed. This may be over faster than expected." Vexlar studied the tactical data. Primitive vessels, basic weaponry, no apparent technological advantages. "Perhaps we should reduce our forces to make it more sporting." What neither the Korthak nor the Galactic Council knew was that those 12 human ships carried something unprecedented in galactic warfare. Not soldiers in the traditional sense, but something far more dangerous. Individuals who had been broken down and rebuilt for the sole purpose of applying violence with scientific precision. The Reapers weren't military personnel. They were products of classified programs that existed in the shadows of human civilization. Men and women who had volunteered for psychological conditioning that bordered on torture, neural modifications that enhanced aggression while suppressing empathy, and training regimens that would have killed ordinary humans. They were Earth's answer to a universe that respected only strength, psychopaths trained for war beyond reason. As the human ships moved toward the trial coordinates, hidden deep in their armored holds, 200 of humanity's most dangerous individuals prepared for their first contact with alien life. They sharpened knives with ritualistic precision, checked and rechecked weapons that violated at least 12 interstellar treaties, and meditated on violence with the focus of monks contemplating enlightenment. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes evolution didn't create natural predators. Sometimes a species created them artificially, and sometimes those artificial predators were far worse than anything nature could devise. The Galactic Council had asked for a demonstration of human military capability. They were about to receive an education in human creativity when it came to the art of warfare. An education that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. In 72 hours, the universe would understand why Earth hadn't sent soldiers. They had unleashed something much worse. The designated combat zone lay in the Kepler 442 system, a barren collection of rocky worlds that served as the Galactic Council's testing ground. Observation platforms ringed the system at safe distances, filled with representatives from dozens of species eager to witness humanity's inevitable defeat. General Vexlar commanded the Korthak fleet from his flagship, the Bloodclaw. Around him, 50 heavily armed vessels maintained formation, a force capable of conquering most civilized worlds. The Korthak were confident, perhaps overconfident, but they had earned that confidence through 3 centuries of military dominance. "Human vessels detected at the edge of sensor range," reported his tactical officer. Confirming 12 ships, just as intelligence indicated. Vexlar settled into his command chair, his chitinous armor gleaming under the bridge lights. "Begin the traditional challenge. Let them know the terms of engagement." Across the void, aboard the human flagship Nemesis, Colonel Marcus Webb received the Korthak transmission with cold amusement. The aliens were broadcasting their terms in dozens of languages, explaining the rules of engagement with the pompous certainty of those who had never faced true opposition. Standard orbital combat, the translation program announced in the flat, mechanical tone. No planetary bombardment, no civilian targets, no weapons of mass destruction. Victory conditions, complete destruction or surrender of enemy fleet. Webb muted the transmission and turned to the figure standing beside him in the darkened command center. Lieutenant Colonel Anna Volkov was a small woman with dead eyes and surgical scars along her scalp, evidence of the neural modifications that had turned her from a promising psychiatrist into humanity's most efficient killer. "What do you think, Anna?" Webb asked casually. Volkov studied the tactical display with the same expression she might use to examine a butterfly pinned to a board. "They've never fought humans before. They're using standard formations, broadcasting on all frequencies, and positioning their command ship in the center of their formation where it's protected. Tactical assessment. They think like civilized beings. That's their first mistake." Webb smiled, the expression holding no warmth. Around them, the bridge crew worked with minimal communication, their movements precise and economical. These weren't regular Navy personnel. They were hand-picked support staff who had undergone psychological conditioning to work alongside the Reapers without question or hesitation. Signal the fleet, Webb ordered. Begin Phase 1. To outside observers, the human response seemed almost comically inadequate. Their 12 ships spread out in a loose formation, approaching the Korthak fleet at a leisurely pace. There were no dramatic maneuvers, no intimidating displays of firepower, no communication attempts. The humans simply advanced. General Vexlar frowned at the tactical display. Are they surrendering? This approach makes no tactical sense. Perhaps they're incompetent, suggested his aide. Many primitive species lack understanding of spatial warfare. But something nagged at Vexlar's consciousness. The human ships moved with subtle coordination that spoke of experienced crews, and their sensor signatures showed vessels that were armed far beyond what their crude appearance suggested. More troubling was the lack of communication. Most species engaged in ritual challenges or threats before combat. These humans maintained complete radio silence. Sir, the human vessels are launching what appear to be escape pods, reported the sensor operator. Escape pods? Before the battle has even begun, hundreds of small objects separated from the human ships, far too many to be standard evacuation procedures. They spread out across the battlefield like spores, some heading for asteroid clusters, others making seemingly random course changes toward empty space. Cowardly, Vexlar muttered, but his tactical instincts were screaming warnings. Target the pods. If they're abandoning ship, we'll make it quick and merciful. The Korthak opened fire, their energy weapons lighting up space as they targeted the fleeing pods. But something was wrong. The pods were maneuvering, evading, some even accelerating toward Korthak positions instead of away from them. Then, the first pod struck the destroyer, Sharp Fong. The explosion was minimal, barely enough to breach the outer hull. But, within seconds, the destroyer's status indicators began changing color on Vexlar's display, systems failing in patterns that made no sense. What's happening to Sharp Fong? He demanded. Unknown, sir. They report hull breach in Section 7, but that area should be non-critical. Wait, they're losing atmosphere from multiple compartments now, and they're reporting. The communications officer paused, his natural chitinous armor paling. They're reporting intruders, sir. Something's aboard their ship. More pods were making contact now, not just with ships but with the asteroids around the battlefield. On his tactical display, Vexlar watched with growing horror as his fleet's formation began to dissolve into chaos. Contact from destroyer, Bone Ripper, the communications officer reported, his voice tight, with barely controlled panic. They report multiple hull breaches. The breaches are expanding, sir. Something is cutting through their armor from the inside. Vexlar stared at the display, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The escape pods hadn't been escape pods at all. They'd been boarding craft, and now whatever was inside them was systematically dismantling his fleet from within. The first scream came through the communications array 10 minutes later. It was a sound that the Korthak had never heard before. One of their warriors, a creature bred for battle and hardened by countless conflicts, screaming in absolute terror. The transmission cut off abruptly, but not before other sounds filtered through, metal being torn, the distinctive whine of Korthak energy weapons firing in desperation, and something else. Something that sounded almost like laughter. Sir, we're receiving fragmented transmissions from multiple vessels, the communications officer reported, his voice shaking. They're requesting immediate evacuation. Evacuation? From what? The tactical display provided the answer. Ship after ship was going dark, not from weapon damage but from something happening inside them. The few transmissions that made it through painted a picture that defied everything Vexlar knew about warfare. Unknown hostiles aboard all affected vessels. Came a desperate transmission from the cruiser Death Strike. They're not using standard boarding tactics. They're hunting us. They know our ship layout somehow. They're using our own ventilation systems against us. They've turned off artificial gravity, and they're moving through the walls. There, the transmission cut to static. On the observation platforms, representatives from dozens of species watched in stunned silence as the Korthak fleet, 50 ships that had conquered star systems, began to tear itself apart. Ships fired on each other as their crews lost control, life support systems failed in patterns that suggested deliberate sabotage, and vessel after vessel went dead in space. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zeridian Empire found his crystalline form flickering with distress. What manner of warfare is this? They're not destroying the ships, they're capturing them. Counselor Veltar of the Astery Collective had gone silent, her telepathic abilities overwhelmed by the terror and confusion radiating from the battlefield. She tried to focus her powers on the human ships, hoping to understand their strategy, but encountered the same strange blankness she'd felt during first contact. It was as if the humans were surrounded by a psychic void. Aboard the Korthak flagship, General Vexlar faced a choice that no military commander should ever have to make. Half his fleet was compromised, the other half was paralyzed by fear, and the human vessels continued their slow, inexorable advance. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the humans," his communications officer reported. "Put it through." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing Colonel Webb's scarred features. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost conversational. "General Vexlar, I assume. I wanted to personally thank you for this opportunity. My people have learned quite a bit about Korthak ship design over the past hour. Your warriors fought bravely, but they were fighting the wrong kind of war." Vexlar's mandibles clicked with rage. "What have you done to my crews?" "Nothing permanent," Webb replied with a slight smile. "Most of them are unconscious. My teams are very precise. They know exactly how much pressure to apply to Korthak nerve clusters to induce temporary paralysis. They've been studying your species' anatomy during the approach." "Studying our? That's impossible. You've never encountered our species before." Webb's smile widened. "General, we've been intercepting your communications for months. We know your fleet compositions, your tactical doctrines, your ship designs, and, yes, your biological vulnerabilities. Did you really think we'd enter these trials without preparation?" The implication struck Vexlar like a physical blow. The humans had been monitoring galactic communications, learning about potential opponents, preparing for conflicts that hadn't even been announced yet. "You have a choice," Webb continued. "Surrender now, and your crews will be returned unharmed. Continue fighting, and my teams will demonstrate techniques they learned from studying Earth's apex predators. Some of those techniques are less pleasant than unconsciousness." Around the bridge, Vexlar's officers waited for his decision. The tactical display showed a fleet in ruins, not from superior firepower, but from an enemy that fought unlike anything in their experience. "What are you?" Vexlar asked quietly. Webb's expression grew serious. "We're what happens when evolution gets impatient. When a species decides that natural selection is too slow and takes matters into its own hands. You wanted to see our military capabilities, General. You're seeing them." Through the viewport, Vexlar could see the human ships approaching, their crude exteriors hiding capabilities that defied galactic understanding of warfare. On his display, another Korthak vessel went dark as something moved through its corridors like a virus through a bloodstream. He thought of his crews, warriors who had never known defeat, now unconscious in their own ships at the mercy of creatures that hunted with scientific precision. He thought of the terror in their final transmissions, the way they spoke of enemies that moved like shadows and struck like lightning. Most of all, he thought of the cold certainty in Colonel Webb's voice when he spoke of techniques learned from studying Earth's apex predators. I surrender," Vexlar said, the words tasting like ashes in his mouth. "A wise decision," Webb replied. "Your crews will be returned within the hour." As the transmission ended, Veltar finally managed to extend her telepathic senses toward the human fleet one more time. What she found there made her recoil in horror. It wasn't the absence of thought or emotion that she'd sensed before. It was the presence of minds that thought and felt in ways that her species couldn't comprehend. She touched the consciousness of one of the boarding parties and immediately pulled back, her energy form flickering with distress. The human's mind was a maze of controlled violence, tactical assessments that treated living beings like problems to be solved, and an emotional spectrum that seemed to range from cold calculation to predatory satisfaction. They weren't soldiers. They were something else entirely. The Galactic Council had wanted to test humanity's military might. Instead, they had unleashed something that would reshape their understanding of warfare itself. And this was only the first trial. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours of humanity's victory over the Korthak. The Grand Chamber buzzed with agitated conversations as representatives struggled to process what they had witnessed. The usually unflappable Counselor Veltar sat motionless, her energy form dim with exhaustion from her telepathic contact with the human minds. General Zakth of the Thraxians paced nervously, his multiple legs clicking against the crystal floor. "This changes everything. Their tactics, their preparation, the way they fought. It's unlike anything in our military databases." Ambassador Kethvar's crystalline structure flickered with barely contained fear. They turned a fleet engagement into a hunting exercise. 50 ships, and they captured them intact with minimal casualties. How is that even possible? High Chancellor Mordaunt, the massive Gorlak who served as the Council's military advisor, spoke in his rumbling bass voice. The humans demonstrated technological superiority in intelligence gathering, tactical coordination, and something we've never encountered before, asymmetric boarding warfare. They didn't fight ship to ship. They fought crew to crew, inside our allies' vessels. But they've only just achieved faster-than-light travel, protested Councillor Ilex of the hegemony. How could they have been monitoring our communications for months? Their technology appears primitive. Veltar finally spoke, her voice thin with strain. Because we underestimated them. Their technology isn't primitive, it's camouflaged. They wanted us to think they were inferior while they gathered intelligence on every species they might face. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans hadn't just won a military trial. They had manipulated the entire Galactic Council from the moment of first contact. We have to stop this, Kethvar declared. Cancel the remaining trials. Deny them membership. We cannot allow. Allow what? Interrupted a calm voice from the chamber's entrance. Every head turned to see Sarah Chun walking into the chamber, flanked by two companions who moved with predatory grace. Unlike their first appearance, the humans no longer bothered to disguise their nature. Their eyes held the same cold calculation that had terrified the Korthak crews. You weren't invited to this session, General Zakhtich snapped, his mandibles clicking with agitation. Chin smiled, taking her place at the center of the chamber without invitation. According to council regulations, the participants in military trials have the right to address the assembly before advancement to the next phase. We're here to discuss our next opponents. There will be no next phase, Kethvar declared. The trials are cancelled. On what grounds? On the grounds that your species employs tactics that violate the fundamental principles of civilized warfare. Chin's expression remained pleasant, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. Civilized according to whom? You established the rules. No weapons of mass destruction, no civilian targets, conventional warfare only. We followed every rule to the letter. You captured ships using methods that what? Didn't result in the wholesale slaughter you expected? Chin's voice remained level, but the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Every Korthak crew member is alive and unharmed. Can your previous trials make the same claim? Councillor Veltar struggled to maintain her composure. What we witnessed wasn't conventional warfare. Your soldiers aren't soldiers, Chin interrupted. You never asked what our military forces were. You assumed they would be soldiers in the traditional sense. That was your mistake, not ours. High Chancellor Mordaunt leaned forward, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. Then, what exactly did you deploy? Chin gestured to one of her companions, a lean woman with surgical scars along her scalp. This is Lieutenant Colonel Anna Volkov, former psychiatrist, current specialist in applied psychological warfare. She volunteered for neural modification that enhanced her ability to predict and manipulate behavior patterns while suppressing unnecessary emotional responses. The chamber stirred uneasily as Volkov stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice carried the same eerie calm as her expression. The Korthak communicate through chemical markers released through their chitinous armor, she said clinically. Fear produces a distinct scent that triggers fight-or-flight responses in other crew members. By inducing controlled panic in strategic individuals, we created cascade failures in their command structure. Their own biology became our weapon. General Zakhtich's compound eyes widened. You studied their psychological vulnerabilities? Before the trial? Of course, Chin replied matter-of-factly. Did you expect us to enter combat situations without understanding our opponents? We've been analyzing behavioral patterns, communication methods, and stress responses for every species in the Galactic Council since first contact. The implications struck the assembled representatives like a physical blow. The humans had been studying them, analyzing their weaknesses, preparing countermeasures for species they hadn't even fought yet. But this level of preparation, this systematic approach to warfare, Veltar said weakly, it suggests you've been planning for conflict from the beginning. Chin's smile grew broader. Councillor Veltar, your telepathic abilities are remarkable. You've been trying to read our emotions throughout this conversation, haven't you? What have you found? Veltar's energy form flickered with distress. Nothing. It's like trying to read the mind of a machine. Cold calculation without the emotional patterns that define consciousness. Not without emotion, Chun corrected gently. With controlled emotion. The individuals we deployed for the trials underwent psychological conditioning that allows them to function with optimal efficiency in high-stress situations. They feel everything you do, fear, anger, excitement, but they process those feelings differently. She gestured to her other companion, a scarred man whose eyes never stopped moving, constantly assessing threats and opportunities. Sergeant Kane was an extreme sociopath before his conditioning. He took pleasure in causing pain and suffering. Now he takes the same pleasure in tactical excellence and mission completion. We didn't eliminate his nature, we redirected it. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Kethvar's crystalline form flashed with horrified realization. You've deliberately created psychopaths for warfare? We've optimized human psychology for combat effectiveness, Chin replied without defensiveness. Every species in this council has natural advantages. The Thraxians have multiple limbs and compound eyes for enhanced situational awareness. The Zeridians can manipulate matter at the molecular level. The Gorlak have size and strength that allow them to treat starships like toys. Humans have none of those advantages naturally. She paused, letting the words sink in. So we created them artificially. High Chancellor Mordun's voice rumbled with barely contained anger. You've turned warfare into science. You've removed honor, courage, the warrior spirit that defines military service. Have we? Chen asked. Our personnel volunteer for conditioning that involves psychological torture, neural modification, and training that would kill ordinary humans. They face permanent alteration of their fundamental personality structures in service to their species. If that's not courage, what is? It's monstrous, whispered General Zaktiach. It's effective, Chen countered. The question before this council is simple. Do you want to face that effectiveness in combat, or would you prefer to negotiate with it diplomatically? The chamber fell into stunned silence as the threat, delivered with perfect politeness, registered with the assembled representatives. The humans weren't just asking for membership in the Galactic Council. They were announcing their intention to reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. Counselor Veltar gathered her strength for one final telepathic probe, extending her consciousness toward the human delegation. What she found made her recoil in absolute horror. The humans weren't just confident, they were patient. Behind their calm exteriors lay minds that had already wargamed dozens of scenarios for conquering every species in the chamber. They had psychological profiles, tactical assessments, and contingency plans for opponents they hadn't even met yet. But more terrifying than their preparation was their certainty. They genuinely believed that their methods were not only necessary, but inevitable. They saw themselves not as conquerors, but as the next step in galactic evolution. You're planning to wage war against the entire galaxy, Veltar said in a voice barely above a whisper. Only if necessary, Chen replied calmly. We'd much prefer peaceful coexistence. But the galaxy's current power structure is built on the assumption that military might equals political influence. We're simply playing by rules you established long before we arrived. She looked around the chamber, meeting the gaze of every representative. The question isn't whether humanity will be accepted into the Galactic Council. The question is whether you want us as allies or enemies. Kethvar's crystalline form flickered rapidly as he processed the ultimatum. And if we choose neither? If we isolate your species, prevent you from expanding beyond your home system? Chen's smile turned genuinely amused. Ambassador, do you really think the individuals you witnessed today represent our full capabilities? The Reapers who captured the Korthak fleet are our first-generation psychological warfare specialists. We've been developing second- and third-generation modifications while you've been deliberating our membership. Kane, the scarred sergeant, spoke for the first time, his voice carrying undertones that made several representatives unconsciously step backward. The people who took the Korthak ships were the ones suitable for public display. The ones we keep hidden are less presentable. The galaxy is vast, Chun continued conversationally, full of resources, territory, and opportunities for expansion. Humanity will claim our place in it, with or without council approval. We'd simply prefer to do so through legal channels. The threat hung in the air like a poison cloud. The Galactic Council, an institution that had maintained peace through superior firepower for millennia, was being calmly informed that their monopoly on violence was over. High Chancellor Mordun spoke slowly, each word weighted with the knowledge that he was reshaping galactic history. What exactly are you proposing? Full membership in the Galactic Council, with all rights and privileges thereof, Chen replied. In exchange, we offer our specialized capabilities in service of Council interests. There are hostile species beyond our borders, threats that your traditional military approaches haven't been able to address effectively. We can solve problems that have plagued the galaxy for generations. General Zach Th clicked his mandibles nervously. And if we refuse? Chin's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop another degree. Then, you'll face those same problems alone, while dealing with the additional complication of human expansion through force rather than diplomacy. The choice was no choice at all, and every representative in the chamber knew it. They could accept humanity into the Galactic Council and hope to contain their influence through political means, or they could face the prospect of warfare against an enemy that treated military doctrine like a science experiment. Veltar extended her telepathic senses one final time, not toward the humans but toward her fellow council members. What she found there confirmed her worst fears. Every species was already calculating the advantages of aligning with humanity rather than opposing them. The Galactic Council had maintained peace for 1,000 years by ensuring that no single species could challenge the collective military might of the Alliance. But they had never encountered a species that didn't rely on military might in the traditional sense, one that had weaponized the very concept of intelligence itself. "We'll need time to deliberate," Kethvar said finally. "Of course," Chin replied graciously. "Take all the time you need. We'll be conducting our second trial while you consider your decision." Against whom? Chin's smile was radiant with anticipation. "The Vorthak Legion has requested the honor of facing us next. Something about proving that energy-based life forms are superior to biological ones in combat. We're quite looking forward to the educational opportunity." As the human delegation filed out of the chamber, leaving behind an assembly of stunned representatives, Veltar finally understood the true scope of what they were facing. The humans hadn't come to join galactic civilization. They had come to remake it in their own image. And they had already won.